Okay, I think we are live. I'm understanding that correctly. So, since our time frames are pretty tight, we'll probably get started in a minute or so. See if other people are dropping in from other sessions or from their break, and then we'll get started. Maybe another 30 to 40 seconds, and then we'll begin. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll just get started just to make sure we can get through all the questions that we have today. I'm really excited to have everyone here. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation today on how you can accelerate equity in investing. My name is Irene Tang, and my pronouns are she and they. I'll be your moderator for today's panel. The panel is going to be focusing on why it's critical to advocate for diverse founders and how to do it successfully within your own organization or industry. So now I'll hand it off to our panelists to introduce themselves and have a minute or so to talk a little bit about their backgrounds. I'll just have everybody introduce themselves in the order of where you appear on my screen. So, Sabrina, you want to take it away?
Awesome, Irene. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. My name is Sabrina Kent. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Programs and External Affairs at the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, otherwise affectionately known as NGLCC. Our work centers around supporting majority owned and operated LGBTQ businesses and providing them opportunities to contract with our corporate partners. We work with about 450 corporations, most of whom are Fortune 500 companies, and they work you have access to our database of certified LGBT suppliers with whom they can do business. So I always like to say, as LGBTQ business owners, we often think of bakeries and florists and interior designers, and we're amazing and we do all of those things. But we are also venture capitalists, we are construction companies, we are AI and robotics, and we span every single industry, and our contributions deserve to be recognized as such. So really proud to be here with you all today and to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you. And next we'll have Adam.
Sure. Hi. Hi, Irene, and thanks to everyone for joining, and Sabrina and Kat, wonderful to meet you. I'm a managing partner at GSV Ventures. We are a venture capital firm. We're multi-stage. We have 3 funds now. So we invest in seed, Series A and Series B, but only in education technology and workforce development. And we really, our vision is to help create a future where everyone has equal access to the future. So issues of representation and opportunity are critical to our fund and our approach. Personally, I came out, I'm gay, I'm married, I have 2 kids. I came out in 1993 when it was a different world and didn't really know what the world held in store for me as a gay person coming out at that time in the world. And have been in the fight, the struggle, and the love ever since. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation as well. Last
Awesome.
thing I'll just say quickly, sorry. I mostly ran operating companies. I was the head of international product at Google. I was the COO of Etsy, and I was the CEO of a company called Teachers Pay Teachers, an ed tech company. So now I'll shut it.
All right, thank you, Adam. And lastly, we'll have Kat introduce herself.
Great, thank you. I am Catherine Swain, and my pronouns are she, her. I am the president of LGBTQ Invest, LLC, as well as another company that is an investment management and retirement planning firm. I came out a few years ago, and one of the things that I did was look for professionals that could help me on my journey. And to Adam's point, it was an eye-opening experience. And one of the things I realized was that folks who are part of the community would have a better understanding of what I was about to face, and also a better place for me to get the resources that I would need on my journey. So when I got to the investment management piece, which is where I'd worked for the last 30 years, my last job was at Goldman Sachs, I realized that there was very few firms that, and certainly on the West Coast, that did just that. And so I decided to start that firm. And so LGBTQ Invest was founded. It is a socially responsible investing investment management company and retirement planning firm. I am the president. I have a staff, but I do all of the financial planning as well as portfolio management at this time. And we are not exclusive to the community. We do open ourselves up to allies as well as others, but we really spend our time from a financial planning perspective trying to identify what makes our community unique and helping folks on their journey as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all of our lovely panelists for being here. To quickly introduce myself, my name again is Irene, and I work on the StartOut Pride Economic Impact Index. It's a tool we've built to understand the economic landscape of LGBT entrepreneurship and how we can further improve and grow our economic impact through analyzing programs and public policies. So, let's start with our first question. I'm always interested in hearing from people what got them personally interested in accelerating equity and investing. So just kind of want to hear from our champions, like what is that catalyst that really moved you to think about investment in equity?
I can go. And I left off with basically that I left Goldman Sachs before I started my firm. And, I wanted to come out 25 years ago, or, I wanted to come out, since I was basically a kid. But the environment in the investment management business was very much not, it wasn't conducive, not necessarily for the community. I mean, there's folks within the community everywhere. It was when I looked around at leadership, at the investment advisors, at portfolio managers, at ownership, there was almost no representation. And so one of the things that I quickly understood was that if we are going to get representation at the highest levels within the industry, someone needs to start by hiring folks for that track. And that's what I resolved to do with LGBTQ Invest. It was not necessarily about the cat show. It was, how do I get folks entering the business and understanding how they can get from starting a career to ownership? And that's what I'm doing.
I think from my perspective, I work with LGBT business owners every day, and I work with allies as well. And one of the questions I get a lot is, what are the challenges that LGBTQ business owners face? And I'm like, well, LGBTQ business owners face many of the same challenges that all other business owners face, and chief of which is access to capital. And in this country, in over half the states, an LGBTQ person can be denied access to capital, credit, or a loan just because of the fact that they are LGBTQ. So for me, it's incredibly important that our businesses have the tools and resources to succeed, grow, thrive, hire, and we can't do that if we don't have equity in investing and access to capital.
I think in the venture world, it's a little bit more insidious to understand how the lack of representation historically has probably affected and impacted what companies get funded and how. And for those of you, I was a newbie to this world for a long time. We're really investing in startup companies, early companies that are growing, that are not there. They dream of being in the Fortune 500, but right now they're like the Fortune 5, hoping to be Fortune at 5. And so what happens is investors who are making decisions about what company to invest in are looking at the business model, of course, but in early stage businesses, they're looking at the team. And you want to understand, is this a team that's dedicated and has the passion and the knowledge and the skill required to build a real business? I think there's a reasonably good amount of data that shows that people tend to feel most comfortable around people that they have something in common with. And the net effect of that has been that the capital was largely held in the hands of straight cis white men, and they naturally funded, through no intentional bias, but through just the accident of comfort, founders that looked like them. And so even the most well-intentioned sometimes ended up reinforcing biases and reinforcing the aggregation of capital toward people who looked and felt and seemed like one another. I think what I learned early in my journey was that as a gay man, I could personally kind of code switch, right? And I could reveal what I wanted to and what I didn't want to. Most people who are in underrepresented groups don't have that ability, that that ability and that curse. And so it made me really cognizant that I wanted us to live in a world where code switching wasn't asked of us, and where we could all sort of show up as ourselves, recognizing that many people have no option but to do that. And so, how do we create both on the investing front and in our approach to investing the opportunities to build networks where we can connect with people who have differences from ourselves and still find the access of comfort and trust that we need so that we can make these long partnerships to sort of fund and support their companies as they grow. So I think it's a bit like insidious as to why representation hasn't happened sooner on the venture front. But I'm really excited to know that our firm and a lot of our colleagues are really finally really meaningfully in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, and today our conversation is about how do we get our organizations or organizations that we're involved in to really become champions, and how do we kind of convince these organizations that we're already a part of to advocate for diversity and investing. So, I mean, I'd love to hear from our panelists about like how you've seen people successfully advocate for, diversity in investing. Does anybody want to start? I guess I'll give you a second to think.
I'm happy. I just spoke, so I was going to pause, but I'm happy to speak on this topic. I think there are two ways to think about this. And one of them is it's personally enriching to be with people who have different perspectives on the world and come from different understandings. But if you're just a capitalist about it and look at it from a business lens, there's a continuum, right? So there's investors invest in founders, founders build teams, those teams and the companies that they come together in the form of companies, then make products for people. What happens is when you have bias in these systems, not just are the participants at the head end of the system sort of like one another, but they tend to make and build products for customers that they'll understand. And the world is changing, thank goodness, right? We're evolving, we're growing, we're learning, and it's a messy process. But from a purely investment lens, it's also not hard to make the case that if you're going to reach this broad, growing group of people across the globe, not just in the US, but across the globe and across all sort of areas of society, ethnicities, racial backgrounds, religious backgrounds, differences of all sorts, you need to have people in your organizations and in your leadership who can help you understand consumer behavior so that you build a continuum and a through line that supports all customers and also all sort of participants in organizations and investors, right? So diversity at all levels of the system solves really important problems. I would also say that I'm very lucky that the firm that I work for was founded by a woman who was a pioneer in sort of being strong and out there as a woman in a tough industry, a tough set of industries, both investing, education, industries, both of which at the leadership end tend to not be very female driven, even though there's lots of people think about education and women. It's a misnomer when you look at where the capital and the power often aggregates in the system in education as well. So we started as a firm with a bias toward more representation, and we ask ourselves hard questions every day to try and stay nimble and growing and learning and improving on that front.
Thanks. So I'm going to add to that if you don't mind. So, one of the things that one of the challenges that I faced early on, especially with LGBTQ Invest, was that, is this an organization for change, or is it a for-profit business? And so in our world, nothing gets done unless there is a financial incentive to do it. And so when I look at the collective equity that we as a community have available to us, so we know that corporations, if you have an incentive, meaning that our collective equity as the LGBTQ community, if that comes together and invests in individual companies that can see that capital opens doors for them, all of a sudden their behaviors change and their investment in the community changes. So from our standpoint, one of the things that we wanted to do was to be able to create a short list of individual companies that allow us to be able to collectively flex our muscle in terms of a social implication standpoint. And so what that also does is it means companies can no longer just casually support bills and, don't say gay bills in Florida. They can no longer casually just support politicians who are quietly voting against our rights. And because of the way that we invest in corporations, and if we don't do that collectively, it won't ever begin for us in a way that we as a percentage of the population ought to deserve.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. There's a consumer imperative here for all companies, large companies, to take a look at how they're spending their money and with whom. And consumers are demanding to know where that money is going. So when I talk about sort of the ecosphere of LGBT business inclusion, we oftentimes talk about hiring and the employment policies that we have in place for LGBTQ folks and their families. We talk about marketing to the LGBTQ community, but so rarely, and I think now more so, we're starting to see conversation come up about actually spending money back in with the LGBTQ community. We in turn are creating those innovative products and services that are allowing large companies to thrive and think about what their future looks like in 3, 5, 20 years from now. And they're creating imperative and that demand for consumers to be able to say, hey, I want to make sure that you're investing your money in the right space. And I don't want to spend my money with you otherwise. And so for us, it's incredibly important that we're looking at that investment from companies and not just paying lip service to say, we're looking at LGBTQ suppliers, but what LGBTQ suppliers are you actually working with? What size are the contracts, right? What kind of investments are you making in the community beyond sort of nickels and dimes, which can go to, far to a certain extent, but they go much further when you're putting your money where your mouth really is.
Yeah, and on that front, I mean, do any of you want to share any specific statistics, studies, or stories that you've seen that have truly motivated people to consider like where they're spending their money or to really then drive diversity forward or change people's minds about diversity in their space?
To a majority minority economy. NGLCC spearheads a coalition of other diverse business organizations representing women, ethnic, racial minorities, folks with disabilities, veterans, etc. And the truth of the matter is, as LGBTQ folks, we are not isolated to just one individual population, right? We encompass all of these different diverse communities, and our contributions need to be recognized as such. And we're not talking about small market share. We're talking about LGBTQ owned businesses contributing an estimated $1.7 trillion annually to the US economy. There are an estimated 1.4 million of us. And if you think about the other diversity we encompass as all of these other underrepresented groups that I just mentioned, we're talking about $9 trillion in economic impact. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs. That's healthcare. This is the bottom line, and it's the economy. And so I think for me, I like to think about those numbers as talking about the contributions that we make to this country and also tying into overall equity and why we deserve to be recognized and given full equity in all areas of life outside of just business.
And I think there's also a bit of a next wave coming. In 2020, the number of folks who were outwardly LGBTQ and identifying, that number in 2020 was 5.3%. And that number had been 3, 4, 5% for decades. And in 1 year, from 2020 to 2021, it went from 5.3 to 7.1. And that was largely on the back of the fact that Generation Z came out as almost 22% outwardly LGBTQ. And so when you look at politics and you look at the behavior of the conservative movement in America and vilifying our community, it's a function of that number, that this is going that direction. And so from our perspective as business owners, as founders, we have to recognize that that is a wave that is coming and we have to get ahead of it. And also, how do we harness it and use that for a positive economic benefit for the community as well, because that's an entire generation of folks who are going to need services.
I was going to add something of a more anecdotal and personal nature. One of the things that I noticed was that I think is always worth contemplating is that openness about your sexuality and about revealing your gender and all of that is really dependent very much on the industry you work in and the place that you live.
Yeah.
And so I've lived mostly in New York and in California, where it's been fairly easy on a relative basis. And a couple things that I noticed, as I moved from pure play tech into ed tech and workforce tech, uh, the numbers of openly out people felt like they had gone down to me. um, Education, as we see from the conversations that are being pushed in Florida and Texas and Alabama, is often at the crossroads or in the crosshairs of really some of the biggest cultural fights that we have. And as a result, people have typically kept their head down. And so we've started some work at GSV. We are also the co-host of something called the ASU GSV Summit, which is the sort of leading convening of education leaders. And together with StartOut, co-sponsored a wonderful LGBT reception at our last conference. But we've now also started an online community that we'd like to build for people in ed tech, workforce tech, and even more broadly education, who are identifying as LGBTQ plus or somehow related or allied with our community. Because I think that the opportunities are just not evenly distributed and the risks are just not evenly distributed. And so anything we can do to sort of extend a hand of community more broadly to people who are living in more complicated environments in whatever way is something that we really want to do, because it's easy to talk a good game about your customers and talk a good game about your businesses, but the hard work really gets done in supporting people along that journey, and we want to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And actually, that was just exactly what our mindset was when we founded this firm, which was, we were in West Hollywood, and and I lived near the Castro for decades. And so when I look at the folks who we need to get in front of, it's the folks in Iowa or Florida or Arkansas. And COVID also really changed the game for those folks, because now we can go to them wherever they are. And so rather than sort of in our industry has historically hidden who we are. So it's often, when you look at an LGBTQ investment management firm, and they do exist, but they very much downplay that role until you get and look underneath the covers. And so from our perspective, we wanted to create a very overt brand that went to folks where they were, and so that they had representation in those markets. And COVID, Zoom, what we're doing now, all of that is a function of that. And it is a new in our eyes, this is going to be a game changer for our community.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think things that like the Equity Summit allows us to reach people in places that maybe they don't have access. Say they're not living in the Bay Area or they're not living in New York City. I think it's really important for me, I think, to look at places that are not getting the same visibility, don't get the same resources, don't get the same investment. Regarding the project that I work on, like we study where funding towards LGBT entrepreneurs goes. And, looking at $2.4 trillion that we've looked at since the year 2000. I mean, 59% of all this tracked funding that we've seen going towards LGBT founded startups goes to the Bay Area, and followed by 9% in New York City and like 6% in Los Angeles and like 3% in Boston. Like the money is really going towards certain areas. And I think a big thing that I want to think about is like, how do we get investment going towards people who are like underserved geographically, not just because of their identity being LGBT or being a person of color or being a woman or being non-binary. I think that's like super difficult of a problem to solve, but also something that I really want to like figure out, like how do we kind of champion our organizations to look to these places that are just very underserved geographically, even though they're still, in the United States. It's crazy.
Yeah,
And
Irina. Oh, sorry, Sabrina, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
No, please. You went first.
Okay, thanks. I would just say, there's a larger issue. There's a reason that the money is going to all these places, and it's because of the talent drain and the brain drain in places that we aren't welcome. I grew up in Florida, and you could not pay me money to move back there. I said that 10 years ago when I left. I moved to DC and then New York City. I live in Denver now. I won't live in a Florida. I won't live in an Alabama. I won't live in a Texas. And I am luckily, or lucky to be an individual that had the resources to be able to leave those places. But I serve entrepreneurs all over the country, and they don't have the same access that our coastal businesses have, or our businesses in tech hubs and centers across this country. And so I agree, it's a huge problem. And if we're not looking strategically at where these businesses are and giving them the opportunity to identify themselves in these spaces, then we won't be able to get the money to go there. But the double-edged sword to that is, if they're in a space where they don't feel safe to identify, why would they identify to us? And that's something that we're also trying to tackle as an organization as well.
Yeah, I just want to concur with that. I think that there are some short-term and some longer-term ways that I think about. I think short-term, we have a couple of very acute, maybe 3 or 4 really acute challenges that I think we're facing around sort of our community as relates to kind of the intersection of investment and politics, really. One of them is coming out of COVID. There was a huge amount of learning loss. So anyone, our firm studies this a lot, anyone who had a challenge in school, or was not sort of in a comfortable environment, or didn't have access to great education, it all got much worse in the pandemic for most people. Some people found their way through to better stuff. I think on the longer term, and also clearly the politics in the education world are very complicated right now. I guess maybe politics everywhere are very complicated right now. And so, but I think longer range, what brings me a lot of hope is COVID broke the spine of the need to work in an office. So there are new pools of talent they may be in, the small town that my mom grew up in. But as long as they have a high-speed connection, and we can create connections for them to realize where they can get a job virtually, that's a better job. We can actually build a much richer network across geos, across people, and across cultures in this sort of post-COVID. I don't know if I should say post-COVID moment. I'll probably conjure the evil eye, but in this better moment that we at least seem to be living in. I think also long-term, what we've noticed is that, as in many ways, educational systems have really failed people across the board. There's a huge amount of innovation in education, and it's not just K-12 education. It's adult upskilling, it's boot camps, it's affordable schools of a variety of stripes. And we're finally seeing the government sort of putting pressure to say, let's make sure that people's money spent in education is going toward education that has what in our firm we call ROE, return on education, not just ROI. If we can get these things right, where your geography matters less, and we can get you the training that you need, we are going to open the door to a huge amount of talent that has been locked away in a variety of ways. So I'm very long-term optimistic. It's part of why I invest in it. I'm a member of the firm that I'm in. And I think that has a lot of long-term potential benefits for people in the LGBT community, as well as any other underserved communities. Although it will take, as these things always do, a lot of intentionality on those of us who have the opportunity to do this work, to make sure that we are extending our arms and our hands out to people that we might not have originally thought of, to be very sort of planful and thoughtful and intentional. But I am kind of long-term optimistic on that front.
Yeah, and I guess on the thought of optimism, are there any programs or resources you want to highlight in terms of improving diversity in the investment space?
StartOut seems like a pretty good idea. I'm being a little facetious, but I actually do want to have a shout out of gratitude. When I came out in 1993, there wasn't much to be found anywhere. There wasn't even an internet, but that's another story. But there wasn't much to be found in terms of information. And so I'm really grateful for this organization's existence. And anyone within that, in the world of ed tech, again, would love to have you, join our LinkedIn group, join our conversations as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sabrina.
I feel like I keep talking over everyone. This is the
It's
digital world we
okay.
live in. But I was just going to add, for us, it's really important that we are providing our businesses with the tools and resources to grow and scale. So whether that's coming through us as NGLCC through our programming, or connecting our suppliers and businesses with opportunities with other companies and firms like the Pride Fund or like Angels, those are things that we are really committed to doing. So I would say to any LGBT business owner that's participating in this, make sure that you are part of StartOut, and also get your business certified so you can be directly connected with those opportunities, both on the national and international level, but also on the ground in your local communities.
Right. And also, keep your money in the community. That is so important at this point, because business owners like me and a lot of us who are founders, we count on our community keeping the money in the community, because we can't hire unless you hire us. And so, one of the things that I was, because I waited for a long, long time to come out, just because there was no jobs for me. There was no jobs for a transgender woman in the financial services industry. And, as much as, we all find a way to make things work, if we collectively put our investment dollars or our consumer resources, into the community, then that allows lots of other folks to have jobs and, more importantly, come out. If I could have come out 25 years ago, I would have, but financially it was not possible. And so you get to a point where the pain is so great that you say, it's worth it. I'm going to do that. And I'm just going to suffer the slings and arrows. But this is where I saw kind of an opening, which is our community is what can actually allow others to achieve, their sort of more personal authenticity. And it comes from the financials. I mean, it comes from investment. We use HRC, human resources, we all know what HRC is, but they have the equity equality index for corporations. And that's what we use to basically filter through. So we do a traditional fundamental analysis, but because they've done the hard work of identifying companies that have inclusion and diversity as their primary, or as part of their culture, it allows us to be able to identify those companies and then invest in those. And then that also provides more capital to those companies. So it's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah. Human Rights Campaign Index for
Oh my
anybody
God,
who
I
maybe
had
doesn't know.
a brain fart.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, I mean, they have an index that also shows like state-wise. I mean, this is a little bit separate, but they also have an index that shows like discrimination based off of various states. So that could be something if somebody cares a lot about like, where do I want my company to be located, or where do I want to hire people where they would feel safe being out at work or something like that. But they do have an index that shows like discrimination by state. And we actually use the same data source, the MAP project, the Movement Advancement Project, that does basically what they do is they look at policies by various states on non-discrimination policies for LGBTQ people, which is really cool. So I think that is another resource people can look into. They have that's basically HRC utilizes that data in order to make their index for their state friendliness map. And just, I think I guess at this point, like if people have other resources they want to share, if anybody's listening, you can feel free to drop those in the comments. We'll try to review them in a little bit. We will do a live Q&A very shortly, maybe in a couple minutes. Maybe I'll ask one more question, then we'll jump to live Q&A. So if any audience members have any questions, I guess we'll kind of wrap up. I mean, in terms of thinking about the Equity Summit, we're all here at the Equity Summit. There's a pretty strong chance our attendees, they're already actively champions in supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs. Is there any type of additional thing you want to say to help support our advocates or our champions on like why should we support founders from diverse backgrounds and underserved communities? Just like, what do you think is like the biggest reason why we should do or continue to do what we're doing, and just keep kind of driving the needle forward?
We have to. I mean, you know what? When I mentioned that stat earlier, and somebody asking me about the stat, I just want to make sure we got it. It was 5.3% LGBTQ in 2020, 7.1 in 2021. There is a battle coming And we collectively need to all, at the very least, identify that there's a reason why all of this anti-LGBTQ legislation is coming down the pike, because of those numbers. And so now more than ever is to continue to support our community.
I think our businesses are the drivers, they are the innovators, they are the future of the economy. But beyond that, there's an incredibly important need for all of us to be able to provide for ourselves, provide for our families, grow our businesses, hire more diverse people. To Adam's point around education and making sure we have access to education, it is such a privilege for us to be in this space right now. It's such a privilege for folks to be attendees in this conversation. How many people could benefit from this kind of knowledge? I mean, there's this meme circulating online right now. It's like, oh, it's another day of my life without using sine or cosine. And I could have really benefited from, information, education around investing, access to capital, how to start a business. These are things that so many business owners have to teach themselves. And so I think by investing in our businesses now, we're able to pay it forward for the future, and also take a look at the most underrepresented groups within our own community as well, and ensure that we're uplifting Black LGBTQ folks, Latinx LGBTQ folks, immigrants, folks with disabilities, etc. There's a way to break this cycle, and it's because we are the majority. We are a majority diverse economy, and we're getting there. So, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I love these points that you're making, Kat and Sabrina. Thank you. And I just want to echo them and add. I think, we've talked about the fact that the demographics of the country are changing. The level of openness of people are changing. You can put whatever laws in place you want. Gen Z and Gen Alpha behind it have made the decisions about authenticity and openness, and they're going there. And so what we need to do, I think, in the positions that we hold sitting on this panel, are figure out how we open the door to opportunities for funding, open the door for opportunities for mentorship, open the door for opportunities for all of that. And then I think, Irene, in your question was really also sort of what's the reason to do this? And I think Kat was doing a great job of saying, things that are successful have a moral imperative, but also a financial motivator. And I will just add to that point. There's no data to support this. I'm going to go out on a limb and maybe make a fool of myself, but I have an inclination that LGBT people and people in underrepresented groups, often more broadly, learn how to be very keen observers of society, because you don't really know where it's safe to step and what it's safe to say and how it's safe to act. And the very fact of us having been observers may sometimes make us extraordinary entrepreneurs. So we haven't proven this out, but if we get enough capital into the system, I think we will prove it out. But being an entrepreneur is about understanding the needs of a community of potential customers, creating a product that serves those customers meaningfully, and then building upon that vision. And I just think that if you start out your journey thinking, I'm a little different, I better watch how the society around me works, you might have a pretty good instinct about what that society needs and what those customers, potential future customers, need, and how to build for them. And then the key secret ingredient that we need to offer them is access to capital and mentorship so that they can fulfill that vision.
Yeah. Just to piggyback on that. So one of the things that we really focused on early was education, because often when folks, and from our conversations with clients, what happens is that often when you are coming out, often it's in your teens, early 20s, that's the time when you get that financial education. That's the time when your parents or someone else gets involved in you from a financial literacy perspective. And so often our community starts behind their peers, and that sort of slow start continues throughout their life. And so what we're trying to do early is to break that cycle and allow folks to have the resources to be able to say, you know what, there's no reason why you can't start a business in your 20s. There's no reason why you shouldn't be investing in a 401k right away, or an IRA, or a Roth, or anything like that. And so that starts with education. And if it doesn't exist in the home, someone else is going to have to do it. And that's where we come in.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really great comments from everybody. I want to give the audience real quick a chance to pop in questions. There is a Q&A feature on the right side of the comment box. So if you have any questions, pop it in or pop it in the chat right now real quick. I'll just kind of wrap up like in terms of my thoughts on this question too. But I really do think, supporting, we're not in a place where we're supporting underserved communities and investing, and all of us are here to drive and kind of be champions to do that. I think one of the most insightful things that I found through looking at all this data from where the actual funding goes, like less than 0.5% of investments are going into LGBT founders. It could be that we haven't found all of the out founders. It could be that maybe they haven't connected with us, or maybe they haven't come out yet. But really, we out of all the $2.4 trillion that we've looked at, only 4%, like 0.4% of investments is going to out LGBT founders. And that's a very low amount. And like, that's what I hope we can change by like doing more research, or the programs that y'all are running at NGLCC, or the things that people are doing in their businesses. Like, I think this is something that I really want to change, and hopefully we can all make that happen together. So I think we only have about 3 minutes left if anybody in the audience does have a live Q&A question they want to add. Otherwise, I can give people the opportunity to share any other last thoughts or ping any additional resources you might want to share out to people.
I'll just plug my company, lgbtqinvest.com. Go ahead, go to our website, and you can just, if you want to connect with me, just feel free to hit the contact button, and I will get back to you as soon as I can.
I'll say, continue to support LGBTQ businesses, continue to support organizations like StartOut and NGLCC. And we are all consumers, whether we're LGBTQ or allies in this conversation. And it's really important where we're spending our dollars. And maybe it's not feasible to spend every single cent with a diverse owned or small business, but take a look at the corporate equality index, look at the companies that are supporting our businesses, that are supporting our community. Supplier diversity, which is the inclusion of LGBT businesses in procurement opportunities for corporations, is a scored piece of the corporate equality index. A company can't achieve a 100 unless they are working with LGBTQ vendors in their supply chain. And so it's incredibly important that we as consumers take a look at how we're also using our dollars to support the large companies that are going to help propel our mission forward in terms of equity.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, for those who are thinking about starting a company, get in the game, try it, reach out. Sometimes I think those of us in underrepresented communities or in the LGBT community, we can internalize a lot of negative signal early on about our worthiness and our readiness and our value. And I'm thrilled that we're having communities and conversations like this to remind us that actually we bring a lot of value. But challenge that voice in yourself, put yourself out there. It's a hard journey to be an entrepreneur. It's like being an actor. You have to keep putting yourself out there again and again and again, but do it. And know that some of the doubting voices that you may hear in your head they're worth wrestling with, and they're worth challenging, and they're worth coming to communities like this where we'll say, hey, maybe your idea is not where it needs to be yet, but we love that you're in the game. We love that you're trying, and we love that you're trying to move the ball forward for a group of people, for a group of customers. So let's just stay in this conversation. For a while, we thought the fight was going to get easier. It's clearly it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder for a little bit. We're going to have to lock arms together and be strong. But we've proven again and again as a community, or a set of interlocking communities, that we can do that. We will do that. And it's always reinforcing, even if it's not always fun, to be in the trenches with allies and friends and colleagues and compatriots with whom you have a common goal of a more equal, more just society, where everyone, and from every child to every adult, their opportunities are available and their voices are heard.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. I think this session is officially over at this point. Thank you again to all of our amazing panelists. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining. Feel free to drop anything in the comments. I'll probably stay another minute or two so I can answer any of them if anybody has questions. And I'll see you all at some of the later sessions today. Take care.
Thank you, Irene. Thanks, StartOut.
Thanks, everybody.